Hello and welcome back to the Comic Books Matter podcast. I'm your host, Jesse, and with me today is a fantastic guest. He is a writer for Panel X Panel, edits for Beetle Press. He just published a book of essays called One Must Imagine Scot-Free Happy, and when he dies, he'd like to be buried in the source wall. It's Sean Dillon. How you doing?
Hello, I'm doing well. So, starting been spending the summer doing a teacher certificate program, and I've been basically on the verge of a nervous breakdown, to be blunt.
Uh, I feel like everybody I know who pays attention to anything important is on that brink of that nervous breakdown this year.
Well, I had to write about Judge Dredd on Wednesday, so
Uh, as much as I know about Judge Dredd, there's I think about a huge stack of things I don't know about Judge Dredd. So I don't know what the level of iffy stuff is in there.
well, it's not so much iffy stuff as it's very much a book about the police,
Oh yeah,
and
that's fair.
specifically the American police.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah,
Yeah,
and
if the movie has anything to tell me about it, I feel like that's a rough one to write about.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually started writing it on Wednesday, so that's
Yeah.
oh boy.
Um. So yeah, I want to thank you for being on. I know it is kind of out of the blue after I finished reading your book. I was like, oh, Sean would be perfect to talk about comics and why they matter because the entire book is just essays about why this book matters to you in a lot of ways. And
Right,
the
right.
deconstruction of 12 issues is it's one of those things where when I started this podcast, I was going to write stuff to coincide with it, and when I tried to start writing about and then maybe it was too much because I was going to try to write about the entire run of Tom King's Batman in one post. Maybe that was the bad idea.
Oof, that
Uh,
yeah. Yeah, like
um,
yeah, I could yeah, I had some difficulties writing about just 3 issues of that run,
yeah,
and very it's an interesting run. I'd probably say it's among King's weaker works, but it's certainly an interesting work.
yeah, and with my history with the character, and then the topics touched upon for most of that story, but talking about Tom King's Batman, it is a character. That I have video proof now that my at 1 years old at my birthday I was just dressed up as Batman. So from some age, some connection, Batman was there. And so to read Tom King's Batman, who was a way more vulnerable Batman in a lot of ways than the last few previous iterations were, it hit me at the right time. And so I really wanted to expand upon that, but the words just never came. So to read your book about Scott Free and Mr. Miracle as a series, it's like these are the words I wish I could have written. And so I'm so glad that you wrote them and I can
Mhm.
talk to you about them now.
Yeah. Yeah. Batman, if I'm being honest, isn't a character that I have some skepticism towards the guy, but at the same time, I'm also working on. I'm a staff writer on a podcast series about Batman, so I have to have some fondness of the character, and I do. He was one of the first characters I actually read growing up. I grew up on the Tim Burton movies, but if I'm being honest, I probably watched the Joel Schumacher ones more often than the Tim Burton ones.
Yeah, I think my parents were at the time growing up. They took me to see the first Schumacher movie when I was just a baby, but like those are the ones that they let me watch the most because they were the lighter toned ones overall. Even though rewatching them recently as an adult, they're not very light toned.
Yeah. Yeah, I haven't seen. I don't think I've watched any of the '90s and '80s Batman movies since I was a kid, and maybe high school.
Mm-hmm.
I keep feeling like I should revisit them at some point.
I think especially like in your mid 20s, just once you're out of that dumb brain phase in a lot of ways,
Hmm.
it's good to revisit them because revisiting them this year with the friends for the first time, they'd never seen them. So I was seeing their experience and then I was examining them. There's a lot of really cool stuff that Tim Burton was trying to do in those movies, and then some stuff that just didn't work. But for the most part, it was pretty impressive to see the kind of messaging he was trying to push back then.
Yeah, yeah.
So Sean, where did your comic book history start though, growing up?
Um, my comic book history started with The Simpsons. As a kid, I'd go to the supermarket. I was a huge fan of The Simpsons growing up since 5 years old. I have distinct memories of watching in one of the winter episodes of The Simpsons while at my grandfather's house when I was 5 years old. old, and I pretty much I my brother and I would watch them every Sunday night whenever new episodes were on. We'd watch them after dinner when the reruns were on Fox back when they did that. I'm not sure if they still do that. They may have stopped doing that. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, I'd always look forward to the Halloween episodes, those that would air basically all month long. Then there was also and at the supermarket back when comics were sold at supermarkets, they'd have this whole area full of comics, and I'd immediately gravitate towards the Simpsons comics. Because
Mhm.
I think my first comic was an issue of Treehouse of Horror written by Rob Zombie, Alice Cooper, and I think I think Jim Booth. I don't know. Remember? I know Gene Simmons also wrote for that issue, but I know there was a fourth one who wasn't quite like the others.
Hearing that list of writers, I feel like there's only one person on that probably isn't a good writer, and that's probably Gene Simmons.
Yeah, that's true.
I feel like Alice Cooper and Rob Zombie tend to have the idea of writing at least somewhat down with their pushes for concept albums and Rob Zombie's directing and stuff.
Yeah, Rob Zombie's films are.
There's
I
something.
yeah, I'm fascinated by them. Like, I I I I'll go a bat for Halloween 2, who and probably some of his other and probably Lords of Salem as well. Not sure how I feel about 31 or or the new one he did. Three
Uh,
from Hell.
yeah, that's like the sequel to what was the other one?
Devil's Rejects.
Devil's Rejects. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. He is just as a person alone. He's super interesting to me. I don't know how much about his content though is super interesting to me.
Yeah, neither do I. But yeah, I've seen a couple of his films and I've found them interesting. Uh, After as I grew up, though, I started to get into superhero comics. Among the earliest of which was when the New York Times did this sort of special where if you bought an issue of their magazine, they'd give you a copy of the early Ditko Spider-Man comics.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and this was as a promotion for the movie. I think it was the first Spider-Man movie with Tobey Maguire and Willem Dafoe.
Hmm.
Oh, and and the one that drew me in the most wasn't one of the ones with his famous rogues gallery. It was actually the second issue where he's literally fighting aliens. Like Spider-Man is fighting a bunch of yellow-skinned aliens. That just I know now is probably it was probably a holdover from the early comics era where they had all those sci-fi stories about out men finding out that aliens are among us, but that that one just blew my mind about the possibilities that Spider-Man could be capable of. Not just some kid fighting crooks, but he could a Spider-Man story could be about anything essentially.
Yeah, and it's kind of silly when you first think about it because like Spider-Man's such a down to earth hero. I mean, he's super powered, of course, but he's the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. He's he's
Right,
the
right.
he's the hero of New York. And so to see that cover as a kid would probably be super shocking. I remember my first issue of Spider-Man. It's the first comic book I bought in a comic store too. It was I want to say it was issue 24 of Ultimate Spider-Man, and
Yeah.
it was just an issue of Peter trying to stop the Rhino, and he couldn't. Everybody kept on stopping him, and then by the time he got there, Iron Man already stopped the Rhino. He's like, "You're a terrible superhero," and I'm like, "Man, these comics are pretty cool."
Yeah, yeah. Ultimate Spider-Man was also early stuff, though. I, yeah, when I was getting older and started actually reading the comics as opposed to just flipping through the images, the hardcover trade of the Venom arc from the Ultimate Spider-Man run
Hmm.
was one of the first three comics I ever read. The other two were Neil Gaiman and Adam Kubert's Marvel 1602, which I still have on my bookshelf, and it's a fine comic.
Yeah, I enjoy
Not
that
the
one.
yeah, not the best comic, not the best thing Neil Gaiman ever did, or even Andy Kubert, or not the worst, though. Yeah. Then there was also an Elseworlds comic called Batman Detective Number 27, which the essential pitch of it is: what if Batman never saw the bat come through his window?
Hmm.
What if he was interrupted and became more of a pulp hero?
Hmm.
So he's basically he he waging a war with a secret society of detectives against the Ku Klux Klan, and though I think they go by they use a different name than the clan because as the clan was largely a poorer racist rather than the wealthy ones. I think it was might have been the Golden Dawn. I don't remember the exact name. And and at the end of the comic, it's revealed that the big villain is in fact Thomas Wayne. Dun dun dun.
So what you're telling me is Grant Morrison is a hack and stealing from all the old books.
I mean, to be completely honest, everyone's been stealing from the older
Oh yeah,
authors.
there's no writer today I think that doesn't take from something,
Yep.
especially in
It's
comics.
yeah, it's just a question of how you take from it. The obvious comparison one could go for would be the Alan Moore raccoon metaphor, where
Yeah, yeah,
yeah, the difference between where Alan Moore takes the Gardner Fox Abin Sur story of a man who is flying a spaceship, crashes on Earth, and gives his ring to Hal Jordan, and turns it into a tragedy about how and paranoia and letting your fear consume you, even though you're told an obvious lie. Whereas Jeff Johns takes it and turns it into a zombie apocalypse story.
hmm Or you take the concept of there being multiple bad guys with the same name, and you just don't call them corporations. You just call them Three Jokers. Um, but I think
Yeah,
we could dive into a lot of the Johnsisms. But even then, like going back to the early books, like he was with Bendis, he was one of the early people I read because a lot of the early Jeff John stuff I feel like was led pushed towards kids overall. Like
yeah,
the Teen Titans books, I remember reading that in want to say it's issue 3 where Impulse turns around the corner and there's just Slade with a shotgun and blows off his kneecap, and you're like, oh, this is what comics can be.
yeah. Actually haven't read the Teen Titans run yet, though. I did. Though Mike John's experience was mostly through his Green Lantern run,
Yeah.
and specifically the Sinestro Corps War.
Mm-hmm.
I did read Rebirth, but that was more of a skim through.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I revisited that actually recently, and oh god, it does not hold up.
Yeah, and I'm always scared to go back and reread a lot of those
Yeah.
older books from that era, just because I feel like the writers at the time are writing for the moment and not for the long run, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
It's hard to write for the long run because
Yeah.
you're all like Grant Morrison literally said in an interview that he only writes for the moment.
hmm
He's always writing as an unfinished product. He's never get it's there's always something that could be improved upon in his work.
Yeah, and but I also think there's a mindset when it comes to writing, and I don't know if Grant would admit to it, but I think he also has it too, where he's not writing to appease anyone but himself.
That's plausible. I can see that.
And I think that's like the reason a lot of Alan Moore stuff and just like the writers who those like the works definitely have issues now, have survived overall. I think because they were really writing because they're like, these are the stories I want to read myself personally, and I'm the only one that can write them, so I'm writing them. Versus I'm writing for the general populace right now in this very moment.
Yeah, yeah.
Because I feel like a lot, especially with Grant's Batman run, it comes down to Grant just really wanted to do something wild, and I think that's the reason
Yeah.
the Batman run holds up overall.
Yeah, I think his Batman run and Tom King's are honestly the only two runs that have held me throughout the whole thing. Like I like Scott Snyder's run.
Mm-hmm.
Some of it just yeah, some I pretty much just dropped out when after Endgame and never looked at Eternal or either of the Eternal series. If I'm being honest,
Mm-hmm.
just I just yeah, I felt and yeah, I like parts of it, but over as a whole, I'd much rather read Tom King's or Grant Morrison's. And then there are previous runs. Like one of the earlier comics I read was the Greg Rucka Batman run, where
Yeah.
Bruce Wayne's a murderer,
Mm-hmm.
and it just didn't hold me. I didn't want to read it, and I pretty much returned it to the library and checked out Black Glove instead.
Yeah, and I think that also comes down to also personal taste always comes down to like what will hold up in a lot of people's minds. Um, because I think a lot of the people that still love the old John stuff, one maybe haven't reread it in recent times,
Yeah,
but two just love that era so much that everything on that era still reads perfectly to them. And I
Yeah.
and I and I get that brain sometimes too when I'm reading stuff that I love, because I'm looking at my
Oh
shelf right
yeah.
now and I see tons of stuff from that era that I go back and reread pretty regularly.
Yeah. Whereas my shelf is, like a mix of old stuff and new stuff. Some stuff I've had, some stuff I kind of don't want to have on my shelf. Other stuff I'm very pleased to have on my shelf. Well, yeah, I pretty much, yeah. If it wasn't for the plague, I'd probably have sold a lot of the books that are in that comics I currently own.
Hmm.
Yeah, I have a lot of Warren Ellis comics.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I was there was a good chunk where I was just picking up everything he was doing for a moment, and
Yeah,
like my biggest two books right now that I'm like, ooh, I need to stop getting these right away were Batman's Grave and Middleman, and I'm like, I'm in the middle of both of these though, and like the collector in me is like, don't stop your run in the middle.
yeah, yeah,
It's a sucky thing on such a small scale compared to the sucky things that the people involved did.
yeah. Oof.
So like, and that's what it comes down to is like, it's not worth giving more money to them because they did these things, and
Yeah,
like especially with the artists and the writers, they already are paid, but I want to show that I'm not willing to fund it more.
yeah. That's reasonable. Pretty much. When it comes to that sort of subject, it, like sexual assault. I think it's mostly just. I bring this up in the book. Uh, the thing that'll pretty much just kill me from ever reading or watching or whatever or your work is if you're a rapist. If you rape someone, then I'm done with you until you're either in prison or dead.
Yeah, no, I totally get that, um, and it's just mind boggling. I mean, it shouldn't be because it's just the way the world is, which is sad. But it's mind boggling how much came out so fast.
Yeah, those were a rough couple of days.
Yeah, it was a week where I didn't want to talk about comics.
Yeah.
So going from those early Spider-Man issues, what was the next step in your reading comics?
My next step was probably Christmas, somewhere in between middle school and high school. Well, when my aunt got me three comic books for Christmas, uh Fallen Sun, and Spider-Man the Other, and a comic that has inexplicably defined a lot of things that I like, Spider-Man Reign.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's one of those weird it's a very weird comic. And highly derisive for a number of reasons, not the least of which being a plot point involving Spider-Man's sperm.
Yeah, yeah. I know that plot point from that book, and that's about all I know from that book.
Yeah, it's actually kind of amazing. What really impacted me about it wasn't so much reading the book the first or second time, but rather, uh, there was a website that was on in like the twenty, the late, the early 2000s. And it's called Fourth Layer. Are you familiar with it?
Mm-mm.
Yeah, David Brothers did stuff for them. His one of it, and one of his articles on the site was a series of follow-ups to The Dark Knight,
Okay.
Sons of the Dark Knight, and there was an entire article by him on Spider-Man Reign for that series, and it just blew my mind about what the story was about. And I just reread, and holy shit, this comic is actually kind of amazing. It's a story about Spider-Man and coming to terms with the death of his wife so that he can fight a fascist government. Like,
Like, so what is the exact plot of Spider-Man? Because again, like I don't know the exact plot. I just knew the meme of
okay,
that scene.
okay, so Pierre's wife, so Mary Jane Watson dies about 20 years before the events of the story, and because of it, Pierre stops being Spider-Man.
Hmm.
And when the story begins, he's an old man who's just who's just fired from his job as a florist, and pretty much just about to be kicked out of his apartment, and he's old, broken, and done being Spider-Man. And then J. Jonah Jameson comes to his door, and pretty much tells him, "You gotta be Spider-Man again." And Peter slams the door in his face. He's, Jameson leaves behind one of Pierre's old cameras, which has a Spider-Man mask in it, and Pierre just while the police are basically beating up Jonah, Pierre bursts out of his window and beats the snot out of the police, and then punches out Jonah. Jonah basically tries to force Pierre to be the hero the city needs in order to stop up the whole fascism thing, and it's and there's a lot of things that go on in the comic.
Mm-hmm.
It's very much straightforward, but it's also very interesting. I feel like every time I feel like I'm bad at explaining comics to people. Well, because then I just end up getting caught in the wrong things and convolute and make it sound more confusing than it actually is.
But I think it's funny that you say you're bad at explaining, because I think like anybody that picks up the book of essays like will want to read Mr. Miracle afterwards. But I think the thing about your description of the book, for me at least, is like, I don't. Whenever I ask someone like, "What's this about?" I don't want to know like the exact plot beats, because I'll get that by reading the book. It's like what are the messages that it's trying to portray, and like what is it trying to get there?
Okay, in which case it's about grief, it's about fascism, it's about the three Dars of
Mm-hmm.
and it's about being young when you're an old man. It's about out fighting against injustice. It's about out the it's about revolution.
Yeah.
It's a story about out coming to terms with who you were and growing as a person and forgiving yourself for your guilt and going out swinging.
And so, with this book in particular, is this the first time when you read it? Like back when you got it, was it the first time you what's the right way to say it? Like, realize comics were trying to push a different message sometimes, or was that further
Uh,
down the road?
that's a bit further down the road. Like I don't remember the exact moment that happened, but but I remember I remember beats of the story, but I don't remember what the exact moment was when I realized what comics could be. Uh, I think, yeah, I'm trying to remember what. Roughly around that same time, I got into I read Transmetropolitan, I read Sandman, I read Watchmen, and I kind of had a long period where I just didn't like Alan Moore, which I think I mostly blame on I I reading Watchmen as a middle schooler,
Mm-hmm.
because like, I was the kind of kid who would I read Dante's Inferno, the entire Divine Comedy, because as they made a video game about Dante's Inferno.
Yeah.
That's the kind of kid I was. So I pretty much read Watchmen because they were going to make a movie about it. I liked it, but I liked it the way a middle school kid likes
Mm-hmm.
Watchmen. So I didn't fully get. I don't think I fully got the comic. Like on my first reading, I didn't even read the prose sections of the comic.
Yeah, I feel like with more too, for in my book when I first read Watchmen, it was, I want to say when I was in high school, but it was still in the time of comics for me where I'm like, after I was reading Watchmen, it's like, this is just too wordy for me. Like, this is like,
Yeah,
I don't know what he's trying to do, but this is in the comic book. There's nothing happening in this book.
yeah,
But
yeah.
now, like, I am slowly appreciating more and more uh his slight nuances with everything, and what he was trying to do, and what I wish he actually could have done with his original pitch with that. If DC wasn't just too scared to lose characters for a bit.
Yeah, yeah. What the comic? Yeah, I pretty much disavowed more till basically the middle of college, because I mix of being a spiteful Grant Morrison fan in high school,
Yeah.
and also because of certain things he said about his Galwag apologia, and then early college when I think I was about to warm up on Alan Moore, or he did that last interview, and it's just the transition from Galwag Apologia to Grant Morrison is perhaps the worst thing Alan Moore has ever written, and he should apologize for that.
Yeah, I get what you're saying.
Yeah, and pretty much it wasn't until the middle of college that I came to terms with Alan Moore as a creator and began to actually like his work again. That helped in no small part to the Mirror of Love, but that's a conversation that has nothing to do with the comics.
And so, in college, then what was this? what was your would you have like your great awakening, I feel like, when it comes to narrative comics, in college, or was it right before college?
It was in high school. The Great Awakening for I think the Great Awakening moment for me was actually reading a blog about comics. I bring this up in the book. There was a blog I was following at the time called Science as Justice Leak by Andrew Hickey, and he was doing a series called An Incomprehensible Condition on Seven Soldiers, and his article on Mr. Miracle for that series, as well as the one he did for the book also called Science Justice League, he pretty much just blew my mind. I mean, with the capability of what you could do with the medium, it was just this parallel. It was more about criticism.
Mm-hmm.
I think my relationship between comics has always had twin been closer to been twinned with my relationship with criticism.
Yeah.
Just it was just this paralleled article that barely talked about the comic, and just went back and forth between talking about the science of black holes and the history of pop music in America. And it just told you exactly what the comic was. And it was one of those amazing things that you don't see that often. And I try to emulate it at points in the book. Sometimes I succeed, sometimes I don't. But we can talk about the book later. And it basically gave me a direction to go for with comics. And when I actually read Seven Soldiers, it was just amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Like I read over the course of a road trip down to Florida to visit my grandparents, and yeah, I just loved every moment of it.
And I think that is such a good example of how criticism, um or just examination, because I don't know if you exactly call it criticism if it's not talking pointing at negative points, but if it's just breaking down a story, I feel like that's more of an examination of anything.
Yeah,
And I feel like criticism and examination essays and just blog posts are good for people who haven't even read the books or the titles that they're talking about, because hearing how they compare and contrast to things in your real life or into other media that you might know might lead you to actually read it. And then when you do read it for the first time, you get just a mind blowing experience the first time instead of just kind of reading it and it's kind of drab.
yeah, yeah.
So between there and the book, what was your first like dabble into criticism?
Uh,
Because I know you've been writing essays like this for a long time, because you include some of the
yeah.
older ones in the book too.
Yeah, I pretty much started. I started out with like doing college assignments. I was doing an English degree at the so I wrote two articles about comics. One was on Fight Club 2 and contrasting it with the works of Grant Morrison, and that was a more problematic article than was back then.
Mm-hmm.
And for well, basically two of the major figures are horrible people. Just
Yeah.
yeah. And the other was an article on From Hell, both of which are on my blog if you want to find them. Um, uh, it's very much looking at From Hell from a psychogeographical and psychochronographical perspective. Psychogeography is what a city looks like when you're wandering around through a logic that isn't just the landmarks. It's like walking in New York through using a map of New Jersey of Seattle, or
Mm-hmm.
walk or take or going through London based off of the locations that appear in a Doctor Who episode. From Hell actually has a very famous sequence of psychogeography where Jack the Ripper goes through London based off of occult sites.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And psychochronography is a concept I nicked from Dr. Elizabeth Sandifer, where you apply the logic of psychogeography to history. Like, what does history look like from the perspective of a television show or uh, or a movie series or film in general? Like, what does history look like from the number one film on the box office? Is a project I threaten to do from time to time. I'm the second. I actually, when I graduated college, I needed something to do because, well, I didn't have a job. that I was expecting to get when I got out of college. So I needed to have something to do to pass time. So I began work on a blog project. My first blog project was Fearful Symmetry, which looked at Jamie DeMatteis and Mike Zeck's Craven's Last Hunt.
Hmm.
From the and I took a psychochronographical perspective on it and looked at from how was 1987 look like those 2 months that the issues of Craven's Last Hunt came out in, or at the very least had their calendar dates on, and look like from the perspective of Craven's Last Hunt. So have you have for example you have Stephen King, you have Prince of Darkness. There was a episode of The Simpsons back when it was just shorts. Or
Hmm.
you have some albums. So I'm blanking on all the names of the stuff that I covered. Uh, yeah, like I just looked at Craven's Last Hunt through the lens of that period, both contextualizing the text that I contrasted Craven's Last Hunt with those texts. And by
Yeah.
the end, I did this massive post on Craven's Last Hunt that I was initially planning on doing in Twine as sort of a choose your own adventure or rhythmic reading of Craven's Last Hunt, where you could read each chapter in a order. But due to time constraints, I wasn't able to pull that off. And yeah, and
The idea of examining that book through such a wide lens of like the months in that year that it came out is such a fascinating concept, though, to me.
yeah, yeah, I feel like it's honestly a bit weak in retrospect. Like I was very much starting out. At the same time, I'm Hassan Otsman El who was starting his magazine Panel X Panel, and I decided to send some reviews out there. My first was on a web comic called Rock and Roll, which was basically this sort of yeah, it was a bunch of kid. It was this. I'm trying to describe it. It was a story of. It was basically a '50s story about queer kids.
Hmm.
It's discovering themselves and being and biker gangs and prep gangs and all that through the lens of queerness. And then there was I'm trying to remember if there was another one before. No, I think on was I'm trying to remember if there was another review I sent before I started sending out the Mr. Miracle ones. Like I just on Lark, I finished reading Mr. Miracle late at night. I I basically in the hopes that I'd get something out of writing, and it pretty much just didn't think that. I just really liked the first issue,
Hmm.
and I thought, hey, maybe I could get a series of articles out of this. So I just did this weird structural trick where I repeat the phrase "Why shouldn't I commit suicide?" over and over throughout the article,
Yeah.
and just as sort of a replacement for Dark Side is. That's the metaphor. It's just this repeating question in your brain of why shouldn't I commit suicide? Why shouldn't I do it? Why shouldn't I do it? That was partially autobiographical, partially not, and just writing about that series. He's just yeah, he just got a lot of practice. A lot of the earlier articles aren't that great in that series
Hmm.
these of articles, but I developed as a critic. I started getting more and more confident in myself and started writing full on articles for Panel X Panel.
And reading those the original reviews in the back of the book, um, I think the concept of you repeating the phrase "Why shouldn't I commit suicide" is such a good reverse on the dark side is from Mister Miracle. From at least my critical viewpoint of it all is dark side is to Scott is the impending weight of just everything on him that leads him to trying to commit suicide in that first issue. And so
Yeah,
you're asking the question and he's giving the answer in every issue
yeah,
for himself at least.
it's an invasive thought. It's I pretty much talk about it's an invasive thought where it just won't leave him. And no matter how hard you try to get rid of the thought, it will always pop up. You, yeah,
So when you get to Mr. Miracle, you're writing the reviews for every issue. What is the catalyst then to start writing the essays for the book?
Well, pretty much I came up with the idea of doing it as a book while I was doing the articles. I thought I was just gonna do this as a like a blog series. Like if it doesn't get it picked up by Haas, I do this as a I post the articles as a series of blog essays like I did with Fearful Symmetry. But uh, I was also while I was working on this and Fearful Symmetry, I was also writing a novel, which I'm currently serializing the most recent draft of and it's a fiction story about how the death of the last city. It's called The Tower Through the Trees.
Hmm.
It's a solar punk novel about the death of the last city. And I really like the process of writing a novel, so I came yeah, I guess so I figured so as I was so and I was also liking what I was doing with the Mr. Miracle stuff. I was just expanding the ideas. Think by I think when I hit issue 6, I realized that I could get a book out of this as opposed to just a series of blog posts. So I started outlining it as a book, what that would look like and I pretty much and by the time I pretty much just picked 12 themes from the series and tried to parallel them to the issues of the parallel the issues.
I think I lost your audio there for a second.
Sorry, okay, where was I when you started?
You were trying to pair the essays to the outline to the issues. That's where it was.
Right, I was pairing the out essays to each of the essays to a different issue of the book. So issue A, I think is the one where it goes back and forth between New Genesis and Earth.
I think you're right.
Or yeah, Apocalypse and Earth, I think. Actually, I think about it. And it's this parallel thing structure. So I also do this with the article where I have two different essays parallel each other.
Hmm.
Or in the original version, in the final printed version, it was just the one that focuses on the article because that works better as a blog post than as a review for Panel X Panel. Which fair enough.
Yeah. Um, so my thing when it came down to reading the book and reading the subject material that you pulled from your life, but also pulled from um, other literature and other media, how much research do you think went into the entire book overall?
Well, I was researching while I was writing, so about 6 months.
That's that's more research than I ever think I could do for anything.
Yeah,
Uh,
I think for some, depending on the chapter, it would take from 1 to 3 weeks to write an entire chapter.
And when it came to the research for it, how did that process kind of look? Did you just know what kind of books you were looking for, or what kind of subjects you were going to go for, or were you just deep in a pile of just media, just trying to find something that worked for what you
Yeah,
wanted?
yeah. What I did was I picked out 12 themes from the book, like 12 things I noticed that were very important to the book, like superheroes and the relationship, superheroes and the some of them were generic themes like superheroes, whereas others were specific themes to the book, like suicide, or the Emmy, or the like. Again, I just put them out into an outline, and then I picked texts that were very similar to those books like themes like simulations got Solaris and also Grant Morrison's Doom Patrol.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I also had to look up the simulationist theories, which are frankly complete and are bunk, as I talk about at length. Uh, so others were some of them were on the fly. Like the original idea I was going to do for the Spec Ops line chapter instead of what I ended up doing was I was going to look at it from the perspective of Scott Free's PTSD.
Mm-hmm.
The, both texts are about PTS. Both Mr. Miracle and Spec Ops: The Line. I should probably note that at at 12 of the chapters were thematic interests of the text, whereas the other 12 chapters were texts I felt would be interesting to parallel with Mr. Miracle. Not necessarily influences on Mr. Miracle, but interesting contrasts. Yes, and Spec Ops: Line was supposed to be the contrast of how they dealt with the mental illness. And then then I had a conversation with someone on Twitter about about various things that the CIA has done, and I offhandedly mentioned in what a CIA agent is writing for Batman, and then I pause and go, "Oh my God, I'm gonna have to write about this, aren't I?"
And it's super great, but also weird timing that we are recording an episode about Mr. Miracle in the fourth world on Jack Kirby's birthday.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
what how much of the original fourth world stuff was read during this time, and how many times did you read through it all?
I read through. I basically read. I read the original Fourth World stuff in high school. My library had a very broken down copy of it. So I had to buy the omnibus edition. And I read through the entire thing once beforehand, and then revisited various chapters that are very important to Mr. Miracle all over the course of reading it. Like I reread the Pact multiple times.
Mm.
Young Scott Free was very important, especially since Tom King literally has that art in the final issue of Mr. Miracle. Well,
Yeah, and
Tom
and
King and Mr. Miracle.
a lot of your essays compare talk about the pact and like the what's the word for it, the level of intensity that the pact has on Tom King's Mr. Miracle, because I think like I mean Mr. Miracle as a character kind of relies on that, but like
Yeah, it's very much.
his mini series or his maxi series relies heavily on that though, I feel like.
Yeah, it's at once a defining moment of Scott Free and also a moment that he is completely absent from.
Mm-hmm.
He's not a he's very much it's not something that's important to to Jack Kirby's Mr. Miracle at all. Like you don't need to read the pack to understand Mr. Miracle. You just need to know that Scott Free escaped from um, Apocalypse, and very much, and something that I noticed while rereading the New Gods is that Scott Free kind of got kicked out of the narrative by the end. Maybe because he was the most popular character and DC wanted to keep Jack Kirby from killing him off in the Hungry Dogs, but it's very much a story where he's kicked out of the narrative. It feels like reading it as a story without the background knowledge, which I
Mm-hmm.
did have, but I was very much reading it from the perspective of what does this story look like from Scott Free's perspective.
Yeah.
If that I feel like I at points in the analysis I feel like I kind of got tunnel visioned by that at thinking because well rereading Mr. Miracle for another project that I'm doing and end up me appreciating the character of Light Ray a bit more. I
Yeah.
pretty much it's Mr. Miracle is very much a first person subjective story with an unreliable narrator. Or uh, and overall with pretty much three exceptions, Light Ray isn't that much of a douchebag. Like
he he's I guess he's quote unquote the good soldier in a lot of ways, where he's just trying to follow the order of
yeah,
Orion, but he's also trying not to get beat up every time he talks to Scott.
yeah, it's just that Barda doesn't like him.
Yeah.
And we like Barda more than and we like Light Ray. And well, if you're gonna choose between Light Ray or Big Barda, you're picking Big Barda.
Yeah, and if you're
Uh,
choosing Light Ray, we're gonna ask you what's wrong with you.
yeah, but he's not that bad of a person. I mean,
No.
three moments aside, he's very much just a he's he's slightly likable.
Mm-hmm.
He's very much he has his own inner life that you only get glimpses of because he's not that close to Scott Free. He's very close to Orion. If it was the story told by if we were to see the events of Mr. Miracle told from Light Ray's perspective, it'd probably be the story of a guy trying to come to terms with the death of someone he loved dearly, and having to deal with this miserable loser of a guy who keeps acting like he's his friend when he blatantly is just terrible. This miserable loser who can't do anything right and just keeps making things worse while saying, I'm sorry for things being this bad. Look,
Mm-hmm.
everything's gonna be okay. And just that's you're kind of you kind of you can sympathize with him.
Yeah.
And like the three, of course, those three moments are very much there. I think when Barda beats him up for the first time, he calls her a bitch. I think that's going a bit too far. But the other two require you to ask uncomfortable questions about how the new gods of New Genesis and their relationship with the bugs and parademons.
Mm-hmm.
Like how there's a lot of yikes about how bugs and parademons are treated in Jack Kirby's run.
And it makes me want this, but I don't think anybody has the in modern comics right now has the capacity of writing this, which is, can we get a line of New Gods comics that understands what Jack Kirby was trying to do, but put it in under a microscope in such a way that, like, Mr. Miracle does it in a hyper focused way on one character and then the characters that interact with him, but to have a whole comic around the world of it.
Yeah, I think the problem with doing that is, well, you pretty much have to deal with the metaphor of the new gods,
Mm-hmm.
and by doing that, you pretty much have to admit that the hippie generation not only lost but ended up fucking us in horrible, awful ways.
Yeah, and I think another roadblock in a lot of that too is it's not finished. So, like, the end game of what he was probably going for isn't fully known, I feel like, and that would
I
think that would put a hindrance on any kind of analysis of it in another way.
And the people who would fully know it would probably not do that sort of project. Like, I think the thing that I really want is for a person of color to do something with the bugs. Like shoot, N.K. Jemisin, or I'm blanking on names. I literally wrote this down at one point. N.K. Jemisin or Roxane Gay or Ava DuVernay doing a whole storyline focusing on the bugs. Ava DuVernay being announced to be the person behind the New Gods movie is actually what got me more excited about the film than Tom King being announced for it.
Yeah, because not only is Ava just a spectacular visual storyteller, but the scope and lens that she will look at that story will be much different, and I think better than anybody else could really do.
Yeah, it's very you watch A Wrinkle in Time and you go, yeah, this is a person you want to direct the New Gods movie.
Yeah, and please put Chris Pine in there as somebody.
I just want Tom Hanks as Darkseid.
Darkseid with a cowboy hat and and a little string on the back that you can pull and he'll say fun things.
There's a snake in my boot,
and it's Superman. he's just crushing Superman under his foot.
Yeah. I mean, I'm the kind of person who thinks Weird Al Yankovic is the best Darkseid ever.
And honestly, with all the Darkseids we've gotten, you're right.
Yeah, I mean, so most of the time they just go for too snarly, or God forbid, make him want to fuck Wonder Woman.
Yeah, like the idea of Darkseid, and I think again it's lost on a lot of modern writers of the character, is he's a terrible person. He's a warlord in a lot of ways, but he's also a man who's like, I'm just doing what feels right.
Yeah, I am Darkseid, and I will sit on your chair.
Yeah, or like you get kind of the John's Darkseid and stuff where you're like, I need to conquer. He's like, nah, it just sounds like a good Tuesday to me.
Yeah. I actually talked about this with a fellow critic, Raitish Babu. Please tell me if I pronounce that wrong. I'm probably gonna apologize if I pronounce things wrong.
Yeah, I try to pronounce things right myself, and I couldn't tell you for sure if you're pronouncing it right either. So he can correct us on Twitter.
Yeah. Darkseid is very much. He brought up in a conversation while I was, while we were talking about Darkseid, what that there's a human element to the character of Darkseid in the Jack Kirby
Hmm.
run, where he's not just he very much aspires to be what everyone says he is. He aspires to be this force that is not man so much a syndrome. But there's a level of patheticness to him. Like he there's a moment in Hungry Dogs where he just looks tired.
And I think that helps paint the argument too that Highfather is the true bad guy. And
I think in the context of Mr. Miracle maybe, but I think that's also pushing it a bit too far. Like if he's very much not the real bad guy of the New God saga or even Mr. Miracle. That's blatantly Darkseid. Darkseid is very much the bad guy, but Highfather has some. Highfather is very much. If you were to look at it from the perspective of a kid who was literally thrown into a tiger's den by his father when he was a baby, yeah, there's some issues with Highfather that he at the very least deserved being punched in the face.
yeah, I guess the idea is like you're saying Darkseid is trying to live up to everybody's expectations, right? I feel like Highfather has bought into everybody's view of him to a certain extent. Yeah, my past New Gods knowledge isn't all that well. It's
Yeah,
mostly
I feel like
2000s
Highfather,
onward.
for the most part, lives up to the hype. I think that it's just that one moment where he screws up.
Mm-hmm.
When you read the New God saga, it's very much it's just one moment where he because throughout the New God saga, he very much focuses on the importance of our children as the future.
Yeah,
Our children are children are who's gonna be running the world when we're all dead. And so it's very much important our legacy is what we teach our children. And but he gives up his son unto the devil.
yeah, to barter what is not probably stable peace.
Yeah, he trades his son for Orion. Like if I was probably gonna be more unsympathetic, I'd probably say that Mr. Miracle by Tom King and Mitch Jarrett screws does a bit of a disservice to Orion. And
Yeah, I think Orion gets kind of the shaft when it comes to.
But the thing about Orion is that he's probably the hardest character to write for because you're essentially doing someone who shouldn't be fighting but still is fighting. And
Mhm.
I feel like if you reread, I think he's yeah I think Jack Kirby at some points screws up writing Orion at times, but I'd probably have to reread New Gods to confirm that.
I feel like with Orion, it becomes one of those things where there's some nature inside of you that you always fight against depending on where you come from. I feel like Darkseid is such a presence that I feel like there's something in Orion as a character that wants that fight, but knows that he doesn't need to because he was raised not to need it.
And yet he keeps going for the
For
fight throughout. Yeah,
yeah,
and some writers will screw that up and turn him into Wolverine.
yeah, well Orion next to Scott, like Orion and Scott are the two most tragic characters of the New Gods when it comes down to it because they are both characters who have a certain nature, and Scott was able to he wasn't raised. He was tortured. Where
Yeah,
Orion was raised, and so he fights against that nature. Where Scott just knows his nature by heart and goes for it, but also doesn't trust anybody at the same time.
yeah, it's very. Scott would probably be a lot happier if if he was. He's happier. He's happiest on Earth.
Yeah,
Earth, Earth. Like I feel like he's a bit laid back to belong on New Genesis, and he's not gonna go back to the health planet that is Apocalypse.
and I feel like if Orion and Scott just went camping for a weekend, they would come out of that much better people.
Yeah, I actually be curious what Jack Kirby penned issue who rang Scott Free talking to Orion would look like.
Yeah,
That sounds like it'd be one of the greatest thing the New God cycle ever did.
because it feels like those two characters are oppositions just because they don't get it. Not they don't get it. They don't get each other, and
Yeah,
like that it's the most pure misunderstanding who each other are, to the
yeah,
point of doom.
yeah,
In
and they
that
and
book.
they never interact.
Yeah, and neither one of them will put the effort, or at least it doesn't seem like either one of them will put up the
Yeah,
effort.
like rereading, like I feel like I feel like I kind of screwed some stuff up while, yeah, I'm at the point where I'm looking at the book and can only see the flaws in it. Like
Yeah, for
one
sure.
chapter was supposed to be about how big the Annihilation chapter was supposed to be about how big Bard look at Mr. Miracle from the perspective of Big Barda, and I ended up turning it into a chapter about how how people decide that ambiguous endings need to be explained.
Hmm.
And I think one of the main chapters, I think it was the one on love. I kind of falls a bit flat for me when I
Hmm.
reread it. I just feel like I don't really get to the point of the chapter. I just meander in a way that I couldn't fix with my skills. I feel like I'm a bit too harsh on the, like I'm a bit. I feel like I'm a bit too harsh on the various new Genesis gods. Well,
Hmm.
yeah, it feels like I should. I feel like I probably should have reread the New God cycle before the New God saga, not cycle, before I did the eds for the book. Except it was fresh in my mind, and I could have noticed some things.
But I mean, overall, I personally think the book is, if it's not just a great companion piece to Mr. Miracle, it's a great piece to read first to help you decide if comics are worth reading for you, because the examinations and pretty much all the essays. I mean, there's always going to be a few that like just don't connect, but I would say a good 90% of every of the book itself like hit me in a certain emotional spot
Right.
or a logical spot that made me go, oh man, do I do I want to dig through 6 boxes and find my Mr. Miracle issues and reread them right now? Every time
Yeah.
I read that essay.
Yeah. I think the honestly of the essays of the book that I feel is the best, I think it's actually the Omega Men one.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, of the ones I wrote, I mean, the Andrew Hickey one and the one by Jen Blue were both fantastic and probably better than anything I wrote for the book.
And but speaking about your collaborators, how did you approach them to uh, put essays in there?
I pretty much I asked them before I start. I asked them before that I started the Kickstarter if I could make them a stretch goal. I and they said yes, and they hit and I hit those stretch goals via both on and off of Kickstarter, and I sent them there, and I paid for them to write for it.
And when you pitched it to them, did you give them any specifics, or do you like, hey, this is what I'm writing about? You
Uh,
guys figure out what you want.
For Jen, I asked her for something on Tom King's Batman and did a brief poll on Twitter for the specific run, though I poignantly decided not to give her the right answer for what she should be writing, which is the Ivy arc of his Batman run,
I was just
which
talking about that arc with somebody recently too.
y- yeah, that's just the perfect Jen Blue thing to talk about for a variety of reasons if you're familiar at all with her
Mhm.
work. And Andrew, I was a bit vague on just write something about it, but before I finally he decided, okay, you know what? There's a new Neil Stevenson book called Dodge, called Fall Dodge or Dodge in Hell, where which seems like it'd be a perfect fit for this. It's a retelling of Paradise Lost as a cyberpunk book.
Mm-hmm.
Look, and it's amazing. And I told him to just write something based off of that at at and I base and after a couple months he sent back his essay, which is just fucking amazing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like
No, like the guest essays, like I would when I first read it, and I read that there was gonna be guest essays in the book. I was like, I wonder if these are gonna feel jarring while I'm like going through it, and they all feel natural, like a cohesive voice, throughout
right.
throughout the thing. So the way like they write compared to you, you could say that they're better, but I think overall though they capture your voice too that you're trying to go for the entire narrative, like the narrative structure of the book in a way.
Yeah, I basically I both put them in. sometimes I had to restructure where essays were going based off what was ultimately written. Like
Mm-hmm.
I originally planned on having the Hickey essay be somewhere else in the book, I think closer to the end, and but then I moved it towards that where it was because as it felt right to transition from talking about war to talking about simulations via his essay.
Mm-hmm.
And I should note that both of these authors are massive influences on my work.
Yeah, and that probably where it comes to like they feel so like smoothly transitioned in your work too.
Yeah, yeah, like I yeah like yeah, and then there's yeah, like, and then I pretty much yeah yeah. But going back to the Omega Men, that's probably my favorite essay in the entire. I of the essays that I wrote in the book, that's probably one of my favorites. It also probably the one that took the longest to research.
Yeah.
Search up. Basically, for that, I had to watch all of Star Trek Deep Space Nine, starting from the end of season 3 to the end of the show. Basically,
As someone who's still going through that show very slowly, I can appreciate your effort in that.
yeah, yeah. It, and I also had to read Starship Troopers, which is probably the worst text I read for the entire book.
I can see that.
Yeah, yeah, Deep Space Nine is yeah, like I pretty much a lot of people say that it's a show about deconstructing the Federation, but in practice, that's only 5 of the episodes.
Yeah, I feel like if anything, that shows is it's about conflict in a way I think the other ones aren't. If that makes sense, like
Yeah,
it's about personal conflict versus ideal conflict. Of that, I mean, there's episodes where they're definitely fighting over ideals, but it's a lot more like I just don't agree with you.
yeah, but yeah, but going back to the conversation about Orion, Worf is blatantly an Orion as character. Like they're
Yeah,
both
yeah.
from the same archetype. Both were children and raised by cultures that weren't their own, trying to remake themselves. But Worf, I find is interesting because he's trying to remake himself based off of the propaganda of his original culture that at the Federation has. So
Hmm.
he's basically like a Muslim kid who only knows about his culture through 24.
Yeah, and I
Or
and I and I think with Worf too, at least in Deep Space Nine, in a lot of ways, he's getting the chance to deconstruct that in that show more so than probably he did in Next Gen. But I can't completely do that without putting my foot in my mouth because I haven't seen enough Star Trek to fully say that. But that's how it felt while watching a lot of
yeah,
the
like
in it.
I while watching while watching Deep Space Nine, it felt very much like they were writing Worf as a Klingon character rather than someone who was raised on stories about Klingons. So
Yeah,
yeah, I think they pretty much it feels like they bought in. They ended up going too far with Worf in that regard. Like yeah, and at times they pretty much just go through. There are a lot of bad episodes.
yeah,
Odes, Odes, yeah, and then yeah, pretty much my thoughts on that era of Deep Space Nine were basically that at it's telling that the best episode of that show had absolutely nothing to do with the arc whatsoever or anything at all to do with Star Trek. Uh Beyond the Farthest Star, I think it's called the one where they're in the 50s. It's about the golden age of sci-fi.
Oh, I don't even know if I've gotten to that
Far
because
beyond the
the two time travel ones I've done are where the I can't remember everybody's name all of a sudden. Where Odo and why can't I now I'm spacing on all of the Star Trek names. They basically get trapped back in the 30s, 40s, and they're thought to be aliens from I mean they are aliens, but they're like little green men.
oh oh yeah, I know that one. I
Yeah,
know the one you're talking
and
about.
the other one is where Cisco and Bashir get sent back to our time actually.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
that's a good episode. That's a good
that's
episode.
a good
But
episode too, and it's a very scary episode to watch while everything's happening around me.
yeah, I very much watched the show before things went to crap.
Yeah, so I don't think I've gotten exactly to the other one though yet, but it's
Yeah,
fascinating though that episode is the best one in your opinion. So I'm excited to get to it.
yeah, it's very much yeah. Like conversely, one of the episodes that people would say is the shining moment of Deep Space Nine is in the pale moonlight, which I don't think holds up, to be honest. Like, if you watch it in the context of maybe it works as I think it works better as a standalone episode of
Mhm.
fiction than as serialized television in the context of the rest of the show because the episode like the core point of the episode is Cisco wondering if he's doing the right thing.
Yeah,
Is he a good man? And but the episode right before it literally has him commit literally use biogenic weapons to commit genocide
yeah.
and literally gleefully declare himself the villain. Let's be bad guys. Like, oh my god, seriously?
Yeah, and I guess that maybe is the issue with how the show aired in syndication in some ways, because like watching it with my folks on and off, they talk about how like, yeah, you didn't know you didn't know what episode you were getting at for a while. Like sometimes random episodes would just go come out of order just because of the way it aired. So maybe it's a victim of that, but yeah, it's
Yeah, just
fascinating.
yeah, but just watching it in order, it's just oh wow.
Yeah. When it came to I almost said novel, the book of essays though, what was the surprisingly hardest part of it all? Because like I know the hard part sometimes people just say is writing it, but like, what was the surprise that was hard for you?
Uh, prob try to make it sound coherent. You know, like I'd have all these sources. You know, like I pretty much got a bunch of sources I felt like would be relevant to it. Some of them were, some of them weren't. Like I got a bunch of not books on Gnosticism that I thought I was going to do something with in the God chapter, but I ended up not using. Up others I end up using more than I expected.
Hmm.
Did and probably just try and make it sound coherent and just make it cohere. Like I could write, but why was I writing? What was the end point of this? What am I trying to say is the thing that I found the hardest.
And
That and
oh yeah,
also having to wait 6 months for the book to be edited.
I could see that being a thing where you're just kind of sitting on your hands, being like, can this be done already?
Actually, hold on, let me think. October, November, 8 months.
um, the the idea though that making things cohesive. I realize when I try to write criticism at all, that becomes my issue. Is like, am I making sense? I feel like I'm never making sense.
Yeah, it always helps to have someone who isn't you read the criticism beforehand. You know, like that's one of the things I like about working on Panel X Panel Up. Haas is very good at going, okay, what's the main point of this? What are you trying to say with this article, and how can you express that the best way possible? Like some there was a talk I saw recently about the role of editors, and it's not so much that the editor is always right, but look at the part where they make a comment then and then try to see what's wrong with that moment. Why that moment and ping them off.
Moving away from the book for a minute, or for a little bit, just moving on to some Q and A's, some questions I wanted to pick your brain on that aren't necessarily about the book, but are still about comics and criticism. One of the questions I was thinking about asking you because it's something seeing you talk to. Uh, Now I'm going to pronounce the name wrong. True. I'm gonna try to make sure I do it right before I mess up, and I'm going to leave this in because I want to make sure that people realize I mess up things all the time.
Yeah.
um, but basically the back and forth between the the old guard in comics, especially DC, right? And how um, we hold on to a lot of the stuff from the past, and it really hinders the stuff that we're writing right now or the people writing right now. I'm curious though, from your perspective, out of all like during each crisis, right? Because there's a ton of crises. What are some things you wish we still had though? So like pre-crisis on Infinite Earths, is there something there you wish we still had? pre-Infinite
Uh,
Crisis, pre-New 52, etc., etc.
okay. Like stuff from the superhero genre or stuff in general?
Just stuff in general in the DC mythos.
Uh, Within DC Comics, I kind of like when there's more variety, like not just the sort of same color, just variety of styles and influences, like not just the same superhero style, house style, but uh, like stuff from off the wall, all bonkersness, this to romance comics, X to EC horror, just general news, just different things going on in the same place with different art styles to match what they're trying to do. Like imagine if you told Darrington, Nick Darrington,
Yeah, Nick Darrington.
yeah, imagine if you told Nick Darrington to be more like Gary Frank.
I don't think anybody wants that.
Right, right. No one wants that. But imagine if none of the comics were allowed to look like Nick Darrington,
Yeah.
or yeah, I want sort of a variety of styles and tones and whatnot, which I think the era in between in these the New 52 and the Rebirth got very well,
Hmm.
because you had stuff like you had the Omega Men, you had the later period of Scott Snyder's Batman, you had uh, Gotham Academy, you
Yeah.
Doctor Fate, a bunch of other stuff that just didn't look like any of the other books on the stands.
I think late New 52 kind of took a page out of what Marvel was doing, because at that time I feel like Marvel was very much diversifying its art in
Yeah,
a lot of those
but
books.
also diversifying its perspectives. You know, like because you had
Yeah.
the but
Hmm.
you didn't just have the same five white guys writing the books. You didn't have Dan Jurgens doing. You had Dan Jurgens doing Batman and Beyond because God hates us. But you didn't have Dan Jurgens doing five different books.
Yeah. And so it ended up, and especially like early New 52 is very much like, these are just comics. These are like these are just like these are edgy comics, because I don't know. I feel like DC wanted to capture Vertigo in its main line somehow. Um, but by the end of the end of New 52, you had all these small series, or just series that maybe didn't get the traction they
Yeah,
wanted, but they were
I think
different.
yeah, the late New 52 era is the DCU period. Where you
Yeah,
had like I really wish Prez got to its ending. Like
yeah.
like I read Prez recently, and oh my god, is that a book you want to have 12 issues of? I
And,
mean,
and, and like all those authors too now are doing new rebirth stuff that are super fascinating in a lot of ways whenever they
yeah,
get the chance to.
yeah, yeah. I really liked Exit Stage, the Snagglepuss thing Mark Russell did. Tom King was very much Tom King.
And I think about like Mark Russell, I think about his one shot with the Riddler. It's like, okay,
Yeah,
Mark Russell gets what's going on in a lot of ways.
yeah,
Um, Another question, and I know this is kind of a generic question, but it's super fascinating to hear from other people's perspectives. It's like they basically, all the comic book companies are like, Sean, you get to write a character. You get to write whatever character you want from our
Spider-Man.
Spider-Man. But the secondary question is, which artist do you want to pair up with?
There are a lot. I could see Dan Mora would be amazing. Tulo Tay, I could see some interesting stuff. Uh, Doc Shaner, Sarah Jolie. If I got to do the Spider-Man uh, Ducktales crossover that I would love to do. Like I have ideas for Spider-Man Ducktales. I have so many
Hey,
ideas.
it's Disney. It can happen.
Yeah, I have so many ideas. Yeah, well, if they let IDW do it, if Marvel gets their heads out of their ass and goes, "Hey, wait a minute, we publish comics, we could do friggin' in Ducktales."
Hmm.
It's like, yeah, just this weird crossover adventure where they're, the tentative title is "Who Stole Donald Duck's Pants?"
Yep.
And then there's like I also have this 12 issue Howard the Duck storyline line about where involving time travel and betrayal. And like I also have this long arc story that's basically just undoes One More Day in a way that basically pisses off everyone who wants One More Day undone.
Perfect. Because like if anything, it's kind of like the Snyder Cut people. It's like, okay,
Yeah,
here's the Snyder Cut, but here it's still bad.
yeah, it's just yeah, yeah, a lot of or getting it. My history with organized fandom has very much been they're horrible, and I know this, and I know I shouldn't say this, but they're horrible because I know this because I've met them.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm a part of organized fandom, and I have been horrible.
yeah. I agree with you, and I get exactly what you're saying with that too. I don't know how many times I see you guys have to lock your accounts.
Yeah,
Um, um,
yeah. I've only had to lock my account out because of like for grad school stuff.
yeah, with
But and I was actually wondering why. Yeah, I the only time I've gotten in harassed on Twitter is when I've commented when I've gotten into the dust on something. Like there was this one guy who spent the basically all of quarantine up to August is just going after every single post I ever did that talked about Tom King and telling me that Heroes in Crisis sucked over and over again.
like we
And
don't need you to tell us that.
well, I actually find Heroes in Crisis to be interesting.
I think Heroes in Crisis is a very fascinating book. I don't
It's a
think it
hot
works.
mess.
It doesn't work, but it's super fascinating.
Yeah, I think it's a hot mess, which makes it good for archaeology
Yeah,
and not
and
much
I think its
else.
original pitch is much better than what it was, and like at least the way Tom King was pitching it in interviews before it came out.
How was that?
It was he was basically pitching Heroes in Crisis as a story where characters were just trying to get through therapy.
Yeah,
And then like once the solicitations came out, he's like, "Yeah, it's a murder mystery." I'm like, "Oh, that's not what I wanted."
yeah, I think yeah. Problem with Tom King is that he's very much an author who does, wait, what sort of deconstructions? Like yeah, he'll like with Heroes in Crisis, it's wait, we haven't had a therapy unit for superheroes before this.
Yeah.
It's like individual superheroes had to go to therapy, and I get what he's doing with it. It's very much a story about like when you dig deep and figure out what the story's trying to say, it's very impactful and fascinating. Like it's a story about the line. At what point do you cross the line between being a goodie or a baddie?
Yeah.
And it answers there is no line. You can always come back. Like
Hmm.
you can always be a better person. You can always heal, which has some implications certainly, but that's what the story's trying to be. It's also trying to be a massive dunk on Jeff Johns, but then a lot of things are a massive dunk on Jeff Johns nowadays.
Yeah, it seems like that's half of the stories that are coming out whenever he starts putting one out.
Yeah.
Um, and the last question I have is, how do you what kind of advice would you give someone who's also trying to find their voice in criticism at this moment?
Read stuff that isn't just the stuff you want to do criticism of. Like watch television and shows, read books, read criticism. Just generally get involved into it and know that you're making a work of art. All yeah, okay. Criticism is ultimately another art form. Just with its own rules and expectations that you can subvert or follow. And also, as an artist, you probably deserve to be punched in the face. The question is, how do you get? Is the form of the punch in the face going to be a physical punch in the face, or is it going to be because as you is it going to be by someone writing a massive piece of satire against you?
And with that last question, what what like other than the book itself, which the book once again is One Must Imagine Scott Free Happy. Well, what else would you like to promote right now, and like where can people find you to interact with you more?
Well, I'm on Twitter at DeathChrist2000. I'm currently blogging at thekingandredandblue.blogspot.com, where I am serializing my fiction novel, The Tower Through the Trees. I'm also a staff writer on Echoes of the Night, a Batman podcast series. And I have my first episode in, I think, I think sometime late September, early October.
Okay, and I know there's other like Kickstarter projects and essays that you're working on right now. I don't know if you want to get into that because there's a lot of
Uh,
those I see being posted
yeah,
all the time.
yeah, I'm good. In Halloween, I'm gonna be doing a series. I'm gonna be doing a series with Raitish Babu on. Please God, tell me I pronounced that right. I am so sorry if I didn't. We're going to be doing a series called "It's in the Trees" on the devil in 21st century fiction, and the only part of that we've revealed is that it's going to be about Hannibal. But
Perfect.
there are going to be some comic book aspects to it.
And other than that, yeah, I mean, honestly, if you want to know anything that Sean's doing, I would say follow him on Twitter because like every day I get to see like what Kickstarter that you're a part of now. Aren't you doing like some Doctor Who essays or somebody right now?
Oh no, I'm gonna be right because another Kickstarter hit a goal. Tailbot another Kickstarter hit its goal. I pretty much said I'd write. I'm gonna be writing a short story on Doc. Uh, I'm gonna be writing 2 short stories based off of Doctor Who, and right now on my Twitter, I'm doing a series of threads on Jeff Johns's is a 3 Joker series each month. Just go through during my first read what jumps out at me and my thoughts on it because of it, called Jeff Johns is a Sex Pest.
Perfect. And for this podcast, you can follow us on Twitter at Comics Matter Pod. Facebook, because some people still use Facebook, I guess, at facebook.com/comicbooksmatter. You can email me at comicbooksmatter@gmail.com. And if you want to have any questions for guests, sent in stories about how comics impacted you that you want read on the show, or want to be a guest on the show for any reason, you can reach me on any of those platforms. If you also please rate and review wherever you listened and tell a friend, that'd be great. Be perfect to get the word around and see if people like the show, what they don't like, get some feedback. The logo for the show is done by my friend Steven. The theme is Join the Restaurant by David Szesztay, and I found it on freemusicarchive.com. And lastly, remember, be good to each other, and Black Lives Matter.
Have a good night.
And let me